All right. Welcome everyone to the Cluster Addons meeting. Today is the 29th of October. And let me see, I'm just looking at the action items from last time. So I added them already to the agenda doc. So I had an action to share the user stories, which I did. I didn't put much more additional work into it. Yeah, maybe people can give feedback what they think of them. Lee had an action to, I don't know, is Lee here? Not yet. All right, I pinged him. I talked to him today already. Maybe he's going to turn up in a bit. I think the last time he already presented his CAP for the add-on installer to be integrated into Cube ADM. We had some discussion about it. I had an action to look at the Cube Builder patch and try it out and see what the difference are with the accordion as operator. I did that as well. Yes, so I don't know what we're going to do with this. I guess the patch needs to be merged first, and then we can sort of update our operator and then update or add some docs. Yes. All right. So on Slack, there was the request to set up a Cluster Addons face-to-face meeting at KubeCon. We sort of discussed this, but I don't think we got anywhere in terms of which date or time or how people would organize themselves. I'm not going to be there, unfortunately, so I can't really help setting things up. I don't know. What do you KubeCon people want to do?
There should be a SIG overview, which I believe we're participating in, I think. And so we may be able to arrange something at that time. I imagine it'll be fairly early.
So that was it at the contributor summit?
That's a good point. Yes, I'm not clear on that.
All right. I guess we should add an action for this. And maybe we also need to write something up that can be presented at this SIG overview.
We probably do. I thought we had something in some slides, but I don't know if we do.
Yeah, I'm happy to set up a small doc for this, or we just do one slide where we say, okay, this is the state of things, and share that with everyone.
Is there any chance that we could do something that's not part of the contributor summit and try to maybe get folks who aren't going to be there also to be able to join? I don't know, unless everyone's going to be there at the contributor summit.
I think it's a great idea. I was just trying to figure out like where logistically how we would.
Yeah.
We could have a lunch one day where we meet over lunch.
That would be really cool.
Would it maybe work if everyone added their names or their, I don't know, Slack handle or something to the doc so people can find each other? Like they know, okay, Justin is there, Sean is there, and Lee and whoever else, and they, you ping each other and figure out this way when a good time for lunch is.
we could also just pick a day and say we will meet at a particular lunch spot at like the traditional lunchtime, whenever that is. I haven't looked in detail at the agenda, and send that email to our. We could send it to the SIG cluster lifecycle list. I think that would be reasonable.
Sure. Does anyone want to pick a date?
Has anyone looked at the agenda in detail? I think is the question.
Can we decide this until next meeting? Is that still early enough? KubeCon is in 3 weeks, right? And the next meeting is in 2 weeks.
I think we can certainly do it asynchronously. We don't have to do it right now.
Okay. Anyone wants to pick something, send an email?
I can probably do that. I will
Cool.
write down a
Thanks a
list.
lot, Justin.
Yeah, I'll write that down.
Sweet. All right.
Oh, is anyone aware of any days which would not be good? Would be a good way to pre-filter. Okay, I will look at the calendar and try to make a sensible deduction.
Super.
Thank you.
Okay. Last time we also talked about, let me share the link. So this was an enhancement in OpenShift, convention for storing operator bundle. Is this something people still want to talk about? I think one idea was to sort of propose this to some Kubernetes list or follow some process to float the idea. Or did anyone want to go into more detail?
So I mean, that's kind of where we're at, right? Which is we have the proposal for OpenShift. We've implemented large portions of it already, and we're interested in how this can potentially be used upstream. The really high level view is regular image container with a layer that contains manifests in a particular location, and that location is configurable via a label on the image.
How do you do auth to the registry?
So for OpenShift, we generate a pod that has 2 containers, one of which has a binary that copies manifests into a config map, and one of which is the actual bundle shipped to the cluster. So it's going to auth to the registry in whatever way your cluster is configured to auth to registries.
Love it. Very sneaky.
Yeah, did you say config map and not secret?
Config map and not secret. There's no reason it can't be a secret.
Because like we already have the namespace support, right, for the Docker registry secret, but I guess that's kind of different than maybe some of the mechanisms that are supported by the Docker data.
So I think depending on how you use it is really whether or not you're concerned for it being a config map. Everything that's in there is going to be applied to the cluster. So it's just a question of, do you want that visible in a particular namespace as a config map outside of those objects or not?
Yeah, that's certainly sensible.
presumably whoever's hearing this action will have to have access to all those resources, right? To at least set up the service account, to set up the thing that will actually do this.
Yeah. It also, that I should say that's just the on-cluster component. You could do this off-cluster and just apply the manifests yourself. Right?
Which is maybe what KubeADM would want to do rather than something on cluster.
I mean, we have some image pull logic as well as some user invocable logic. Whatever KubeADM has to do, the runtime needs to be supported. And then, yeah, I actually don't see why that couldn't just be run from the master's or the control plane node context from the host, because that's where the KubeADM will run. Even when you run KubeADM inside of a container, it's the presumption is that you have access to the CRI. I'd say that's probably true for cops. For cops, you're not going to be on the node, so you would need to have a compatible runtime present, unless we ran the installer from an operator inside of the cluster, which isn't unheard of. There's already components in cops that run that way. Do you have an opinion, Justin?
Yeah, I think we'd probably run the operators on the cluster, and they would, for those, there will also be, I think, some components. Well, currently we have some components that are sourced from the CLI, and as you point out, that would then require a Docker, well, the ability to read a Docker image. It is not terribly difficult to read a Docker image, so we might be able to make that work, I guess. Or I should say a container image, right? Like just build in the equivalent of, is it Crane, like into cops or whatever it needs to read from Docker without having, or from a container without having Docker installed. Without being guaranteed you can have Docker installed.
Yeah, that's exactly like what I was getting at. Is in KubeADM, I think it makes probably more sense because that's run from a control plane node at some point for a init. Like you are on the node and the KubeADM binary is operating in a process on that node in some privileged context. But for cops, you're usually on an operator machine or on a person's machine, right? So if you want to support that kind of OCI installation, we'll either need that Docker image support from a runtime daemon on the machine, libraries that are baked into cops, such as Umaki, or we'll need to run that in the cluster using one of those techniques.
And I think I'd lean towards the cluster, except I think the exception would be if we're able to like get some information about like what ports a CNI provider needs open, right? Like we haven't really figured out what the mechanism is, but like that's where I can see like us wanting to not run that on the cluster for security reasons, but to run it in some sort of external, like in COP CLI, for example.
The other complication that you would have with running it in the cluster is that what I kind of see is one of the more popular parts of the UX is that you can patch the add-ons with folders. So you would need to be shipping these tar balls up to the cluster. It's not like purely a network reference anymore.
Could we, if I understand what you're saying correctly, is that something that we could address with the customized tooling so that you could reference one of these images as a base separately? Or did I misunderstand what?
I think the problem comes from the strength of referencing the image as a base, because then I can do that like in a regular file or API object on my local machine. And in the case of COPS, you're not on the same hardware, you're not in the same Linux kernel user space as the cluster itself. So if you want to run the installation in a pod on the cluster, you need to ship any of those user supplied contexts over to do the installation there. So it almost does make more sense that the install would run from wherever the user is operating the installation mechanism.
I'd say the good news is that, like, at least for COPS, although what you describe is great, like, I don't think COPS actually does a great job of that yet. So it doesn't, like, it's actually not very practical to like patch one of the, today it is not very practical in COPS to like easily replace one of the sort of core manifests or anything like that. So we have that going for us, that we are less advanced than you attributed. But yeah, it would be good to figure out a nice workflow so that users could easily like bring their own things. But it sounds like, you know, like creating an image is not the hardest thing in the world for most users. So if we can like wrap this in some, I imagine that OpenShift, for example, already has some nice tooling that makes this not like, you're not constructing tar files, I imagine, or tar balls and doing it by hand. I imagine you have a nice tooling somewhere.
Yeah, and then the same thing for like repository auth, right? If you just want to push up your add-on fork to your GitHub Enterprise internal Git repository or something like that, then I imagine that's going to be something people reach for. So the networked solutions, right, like where you're actually pushing up this package of yours to an OCI registry or a Git repository or a HTTPS file served from some web server. All of those things sound like they would make perfect sense. And whether you were installing from your laptop or from a operating or job style pod for the COPS installation inside of the cluster. And then just the only difference between those two things is that, like, as a user, if I want to provide a context that is not served by some registry, repo, or server, then you need to distribute those files to the cluster if you want to run the installation workload in the cluster. And then I was also listening carefully for the fact that you said that, like, that's not a use case that COPS is even capable of doing right now, is patching these add-ons. So as long as there is a way to do it, then that's a good thing.
Yeah, I'm not disputing that it's a use case. I'm just saying we don't currently do a good job of supporting it.
I am curious if, both of you touched on this a little bit, but I'm curious if we think there's value in defining these images such that they don't require the runtime at all. So there's two options, right? Like we could say we specify a folder and an image, and we treat the image as a normal container image, and you need a runtime with a union file system to find out what the final set of manifests in that folder will be. And then the other option is we're just using the image format as a tarball metadata container, and we treat a particular layer as a particular container that contains the manifest, and that's all we care about. I could see both ways being useful for different things, and I'm just curious, since like there were some opinions I heard thrown around.
And the difference would be basically multi-layer support, right? Like
Right.
Yeah, it would sure be handy to only have a single layer, but I also imagine from a user point of view, like I can imagine like it would be nice to just drop a patch onto an existing layer. So it would be nice if the tooling flattened it, but I imagine that we can have a library. I haven't looked at like Crane is my preferred library. I haven't looked at whether Crane can like pre-flatten for me or whether I have to like do some stuff or how bad it would be. I can't imagine it'd be that bad. I have not tried, so I don't know how horrible it is.
And the main difference here would be because Evan built the KPG demo, which does exactly that, which is it uses a specific metadata layer that is not for a file system. It's just for specifying manifest or a customized file. And then you use the KPG library to unpack that OCI image and get those manifests into memory inside of your Go program. So from a technical standpoint, using OCI that way, which isn't supported to my understanding by all registries right now, that is technically simple and elegant. I also don't see why we couldn't support both if that was a reasonable support matrix. But the main reason why your current KEP on the OpenShift, or I don't know what an OpenShift OEP, your OSEP, your current enhancement on that side is using the Docker stuff is because it's easy for people to build those images with a Docker file.
Yeah, it's definitely a function of current tooling and support rather than a technical argument.
Yeah, I think it'd be interesting if we started with the Docker file, just regular container image to start with, defining that. And as registries learn to support all the other ways and all the tools, learn to be able to build the things, that we can transition it over to the simpler and more, what's the word? You used a really good word, Lee. I can't remember what it was, but that solution in the future.
Like
that would be my vote.
A simpler implementation or a more accurate OCI model. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, at some point, it might make sense to do that, but just like for the record, and this is kind of embarrassing, but I actually implemented add-on installer as like 100-line bash script, and I didn't check it in anywhere and accidentally deleted it. But it used Umaki, which is a library, but also a command line tool. If you've never used Umaki before, it's capable of unpacking with no container runtime. It just is capable of operating on images. And so you can get like the result of a union file system with like a single CLI exec. And that's the first thing I built. I didn't even do the OCI label thing like you guys have done in the Docker file, but I just like had a canonical directory called Addon. And if you just, like if you just put stuff in the Addon directory, then it was part of the manifest list.
Lee, how do you spell Umaki?
UMOCI.
Oh, sneaky.
And I believe that's Alexarai who's built that.
I didn't realize that you had essentially done this exact idea before. That's pretty interesting.
Yeah, I've done that exact same thing in a vacuum,
Mhm.
in a simpler and more crude fashion using Bash.
No,
I still have the Docker file, actually. I just don't have the install script anymore. But the Docker file takes one of our customized examples from the main repository and packages it into a Docker container, just using that directory. So I am like all about the usability, and I think it makes sense to use the Docker file.
So what's the next steps then? Should we like create like a spec almost for what we would expect in the Docker file and what it looks like? Or
Well, I guess we just have that label, right? Which I guess right now is probably like io.openshift.addon directory or something.
that's pretty much right.
So that's like basically the only real important part about the spec.
There's a little bit more to it for what we're using it for, in that we needed a distinction between manifests that can actually be applied to the cluster and metadata that might change the way those manifests are applied or processed. So we have labels for each of those, so it's nothing surprising, but there is a little bit more to it than just the one label. And so, I don't know, it sounds like if we're approaching this in a bunch of different ways, it might be nice if we could all agree on like what these labels are and what they mean and how they're processed, so that in the future we can build tools that all use the same underlying things.
I have a question that makes me think of, which is that in the install API declaration, I decided in the KEP to force the user to add names for each thing, which I don't think is unreasonable. That's pretty simple. It's maybe a little bit less machine oriented, because then you can't just like add refs to a list. I guess you could generate IDs and they just wouldn't mean much. But should we like have like a default name for an add-on? Or is that just kind of not even that useful? Because we could shove that in a label, but then it's like as soon as you start extending the OCI images that way, you have to have a way to also represent those things in like a customized file or like some API object inside of a Git repo. Like the more that we bolt on to the labels portion of it, that isn't just like use customize or use a manifest list, then the more stuff we potentially need to add to whatever is inflating the contents of the add-ons. Does that make sense?
It does, and that is why we've, at least for this proposal, we've tried to have the label data be the things that tell you where to find other data in the image. And,
Okay.
And the media, so the way the proposal is right now is that there's a media type that tells you what the type of this content is, and then the value is the location in the image where that content exists. So the tool knows what type of content to expect and then where to find it, and then slides from there. But you're right that like as you add more and more stuff, you could blow up all your labels so that, and all that data could be on a top level label. Any of the metadata we're talking about could just be a label. The reason, the like implementation reason why this is less ideal for today's world is that when we're doing the on-cluster unpacking, we have no way to get the labels for an image in Kubernetes. We have to only pull the contents after the fact. So right now we're sort of keeping those things in sync, but it also has the advantage of the tooling is a little more flexible.
I certainly could see the value because I think it's been pretty loudly requested that we don't only support customize, but that we support the richness of the ecosystem that's just using these flat manifests. Some of those are just like a single file, and then some of them are directories in Git repos. As far as like using kubectl apply, you can kubectl apply a single resource or a multi-resource manifest like YAML file. But then inside of an OCI image, there's more creative ways for you to structure, like if you just want to work with plain manifests, I guess. So having those metadata labels seems like it would make sense if you wanted to support, like, I want to package things inside of this OCI image, and I'd like to specify whether it's supposed to be inflated by customize or just applied as a list of these things.
And honestly, just that might be enough of a spec, like Sean was saying. Just having a convention around what labels you put on and what they mean. We don't all have to use the same labels, at least not anytime soon or anything like that. But it sounds like there might be value in collaborating on the meta format of the labels, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully are you guys using customize in your OCI images right now?
No, we're not, but that is, it's on the mind.
Yeah, I mean, maybe that's something that would be useful to trickle down upstream.
So should we just maybe lift and shift this proposal that we have, drop it into a document in like a cluster add-ons repo and agree on some sort of what this will look like? And we can like talk about naming and things like that in that PR. Would that be of interest to folks?
The habit that we have on the Kubernetes team is before, like if we want to collab on a KEP, we just throw it into a Google Doc first before it goes into the KEP repo.
Okay, cool. So we can do that then. We'll throw it into a Google Doc, and we can
share it,
ship it,
an issue or whatever you want.
Cool.
Yeah, sometimes it only ever makes it to the Slack channel, but I think it would probably be more polite since I've noticed when we create issues, there are people from different time zones that have feedback.
Okay.
So maybe let's put that into the OCI image issue that we already have open. We can link the Google Doc there.
But it seems really great. I'd love to, I'm looking forward to looking into it in detail. But yeah, I really like the trick as well, the two container trick.
Yeah, using labels to specify how to inflate the image is a good little innovation there. It lets you be a little bit more creative. Ooh, yeah, because I can take an existing, you can override labels, right? In like a map style fashion. Like if I took somebody else's image, I could override the directory that's read.
You can do that, but that will change the content of the image, right? Because the labels are part of the manifest.
Yes, right. I would, like if I wanted to fork somebody's add-on, in an OCI style.
Mm-hmm.
I could override the label value to point to a new directory that I add that actually references the manifests using customize.
Yeah, definitely.
And then the only other thing that I kind of ran into playing with this is that if you want people to do like Docker exports and stuff, Docker adds a bunch of stuff to the root file system. So that might be like a lint or warning opportunity, I would guess.
I've noticed Docker adds a bunch to the config metadata objects. I don't think Docker touches the actual contents of the layers themselves.
Yeah, it's not really an issue so much as like the image, but when you create a container from the image and then do a Docker X or Docker Docker copy.
Yeah.
Yeah, like if I do even just a create and I don't even run a process from an image, and then I do a Docker copy of the root file system into some directory, then you'll have like an Etsy host file and that kind of thing. Which is, it's, interesting, but it might be in the best interest, whatever tooling we have, that maybe it encourages people to always use folders.
Mm-hmm.
So that way things stay organized.
That's a good idea.
Yeah. But, cool. Well, that's exciting. Yeah, if we could get the existing enhancement contents into a doc and then update that on the issue and just ping the Slack channel or cluster lifecycle for some feedback once we think it's starting to look like how we want, then that'd be a good step to working toward customized support. I imagine that's going to be like the main addition, and then maybe just like label schema stuff, since most of what we need is probably already in the KEP. Thank you guys for, or thank you all for taking the time to, just, I guess, inform us about the OCI stuff. There's a lot of facets to making this work and like getting all of the pieces into the upstream. This was one of the reasons I think early on why I was just like, why don't we just use Helm? Because it's really significant number of things to end up with, like packaging and distribution and installation mechanisms with the proper features that people want to just get things into the cluster in a declarative way.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a conversation to be had about how this approach collides with Helm's future packaging approach, which is OCI. This basic idea is essentially, let's do what OCI is trying to do, but without making these things not actually Docker images. We're still going to just use actual Docker images. And then the OCI spec is all about changing the way you interpret the layers that are listed and allowing like multiple nestings of those things. So Helm is definitely looking at a similar packaging format based on OCI, but is not a container image, and so would not be pullable by Docker. By kubelets, for example.
Would the kubelets not be able to pull that image?
I think it depends on the runtime. I don't believe that Cryo can pull them, but might be out of date. But yeah, this is part of the tooling issue, is that a lot of things are hard-coded to only support either just the Docker media types or just the Docker and just the OCI media types. And anything outside of those, so OCI is about enabling new media types, and all of the all of the current OCI media types are basically the same as the Docker ones, so they don't allow for different interpretation of the content. But I think that that's where Helm is going, because I believe that they're trying to define new media types last I checked.
Yeah, that's my understanding, is that if you package a chart in an OCI image, it is not using the file system layers.
Yeah.
Which is kind of interesting, actually, because you can get pretty arbitrary with how you structure a chart. So they must have pretty accurate media types, and then they're walking the tree.
Actually, the most recent email that I saw, I think, was saying they were going to walk that back and just do like tar/gzip as a generic media type, but maybe I misread. I have to go back and check.
Oh.
So,
okay.
So if that's the way that Helm goes, then we still probably want some sort of a labeling mechanism.
Yeah, we definitely want to be able to differentiate. If it's something as simple as that, it's going to be difficult to tell. Yeah, that's a really good move, to at least have a label, a couple of them. So kind of where we're at, and sorry, I missed the first 10 minutes of this. So it looks like what was discussed here. Cluster add-ons, agenda. See, yeah, so we talked about setting up a time to meet, and then Justin was going to take that, and then now we're talking about the OCI image stuff, and we're going to get the Google Doc up, but we didn't talk about anything else technical. So maybe just a helpful, like, high-level overview of where everything is. We need a way to get things into a cluster from the current installing tools. We have the installer library and the KEP and a POC implementation in KubeADM that's starting to work a little bit. I am still working on that, making some API changes. Assuming things are going well there, we'll have a way to get stuff into a cluster. That's using customize and plain manifests, which means that we support regular files that people have. We support things over an HTTP server. And then we have Git repos and subdirectories of Git repos. So that's already pretty powerful. We've just talked about adding an additional OCI packaging like delivery format that could work for both manifests and customize, differentiating with media type labels. And those labels can direct on how the image is supposed to be inflated, such as the file types and locations that are necessary to do that. Obviously, we'd need to address the concern of like having multiple media types that are incompatible being labeled. That's probably just an error. We'll need some way to consume that in a library format. We've talked about some ways to do that, either using the runtime that's on a person's computer or in a cluster, or just using tools like the Umaki library, the UMOCI. And then now that we have a way to package things, that's where the critical work that Jeff and Justin have been doing on the operator side of stuff comes in. Because just packaging manifests and allowing users to patch them doesn't allow us to codify a more complex lifecycle, such as determining what service addresses are supposed to be based off of existing network conditions, or performing config file migrations, or storage upgrades, or other things that an operator is more fit for. So they've been working on a kube proxy operator, technical details of which will be more involved, as well as the core DNS operator based off of the kube builder updates that are going into the V2 branch. So the kube builder V2 stuff will enable us to do things in a better way. We'll create the core DNS operator as well as the the node local DNS operator. And these are examples then of packages that we could install that would result in non-trivial behavior inside of the cluster. So the user would modify their installer configuration API, pass that to the installer tool. It invokes the library. It's able to fetch the add-on either as a manifest or a customized directory from the 4 different packaging formats: folder, server, OCI, and Git repo. And then that gets inflated into the cluster using the privileged permissions, the privileged RBAC that is available to the cluster installer, be it kops, kubedm, EKS cuddle. And then the add-on gets into the cluster, the operator boots up with its RBAC that's packaged inside of the add-on, and it's capable of doing its own thing at that point. And then the other bit of this is that I believe it's the best move, and this is talked about in the installer kep, to take the API object that the user did specify about what they wanted to install and to just store that in a config map inside of the cluster so that it can be compared against by future runs of the tool. That way we can prune add-ons and reapply things to the proper place. So, does that sound like a mostly cohesive view of the world that actually lets users do what they want and lets maintainers package what they need in sensible ways with a small enough support matrix where we aren't incapable of fielding all of the features and issues?
Can we write that down so I can read it a couple of times?
Yes.
Because I feel like I listened and I heard most of what you were saying, but my brain is dropping parts of it, I think. So
yeah,
it would be helpful if we could write it down just for me. I mean, I don't know if everybody else is good. But.
I think that even just the act of writing that down would be helpful for me because I don't think I've ever said those things in a paragraph before. So yeah, I will do that, Sean. Thanks. Yeah, we can condense kind of the entire world of issues and active work and pull requests into something that is consumable in a minute. That's a good idea. I will add an action item. Action. Condense current state of work and technical approach. Into single location so that we may consume the project direction quickly. And this will be the installer libs API, and then there's the packaging for manifests and customizers, and then there's the operators themselves. Cool. So that's where my understanding is from like a project management perspective. And if we can, as long as I'll make sure to write that up and we can get some asynchronous feedback, just make sure that no one's seeing shortcomings or having like any issues with the way that things are moving. And then ideally we can take kind of these three streams of work that are happening right now and build something cohesive for users. Cool. All right. Well, I imagine Justin's probably off in library land reading Umaki code now. And I don't think we have anything else on the agenda. So if we get that date on the calendar, get the KEP, start collaborating on a Google Doc for it, and then I will do that small write-up, then we'll have made pretty good progress. And we can probably close this meeting out unless anybody else has something they want to bring up. Cool.
No, I think we're good.
All right. Thanks for organizing this, Daniel.
Yeah, thanks a lot, everyone. And see you again in 2 weeks. Bye.